These are 98 cents, so we can either can these or make some soup. It's a good deal. Welcome back to The Rustic Wife. I'm Alana. Today I'm in the kitchen and I am going to be preserving some random things in the middle of the winter. I'm going to be preserving some mushrooms. Yesterday I was at the grocery store, and if any of you know me, you know how much I love a good deal at a thrift store, at an auction, and even at a grocery store. So this store in particular had 1 pound packages of mushrooms on for 98 cents. Usually they are between $4 and $5 per pound. So obviously I had to pick up 5 pounds of them to fill my pantry shelves and to do something else with, maybe some soup. But I also wanted to try marinating some. I've never marinated them before. I love marinated mushrooms, so I have no idea why I've not done that. So I have 5 packages of these. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to can some of them, and I've got some half-pint jars. I'm just gonna can some so I can have them for pizza or omelets, saute them with steak or whatever I use mushrooms for. So I thought while they're on sale, I'll grab a bunch and I can preserve them. So first I'm going to get these clean. I'm going to soak them in some cold water for about 10 minutes and get them clean. And then I'm going to sort them into sizes, and some of them are big, so I'm going to cut those up into pieces to can them. The smaller ones I'll keep for the marinated mushrooms. So we'll get started. So you can see here I've got my 5 pounds of mushrooms. I have white mushrooms and cremini mushrooms. So also these containers here, they're plastic, but they'd be good to grow some seedlings in those, like maybe do some microgreens or something. So I'll wash those when I'm done and I'll save those. Right, so over here I have my pressure canner, and it has 4 quarts of water in there. Now that is how much water my pressure canner requires. You're gonna have to check your owner's manual on your pressure canner to see how much water you need in your canner. Now, since this is a pressure canner, it does not require that the jars be covered with water like you would in a hot water bath canner. This only requires a certain amount of water, and like I said, check your owner's manual. I have a kettle full of hot water, and I'm going to be using that hot water to fill up my mushrooms once I've packed them in the jars. I have a clean kitchen towel and also a clean dish rag that I'm going to be using to wipe off the rims of the jars. I've got my ladle, of course my lid. I've got a canning funnel, a jar lifter. I have a chopstick, use anything plastic, wooden, non-metallic, to use this to eliminate the bubbles once you've filled up your jars. You don't want bubbles in your jars. Also, I have my lids. They've been washed in hot soapy water, and the inner lids, they've also been washed in hot soapy water. I have a few jars here for the marinated mushrooms. I'm not sure how many I'm gonna need. And my half-pint jars are actually keeping warm in the oven, and I've washed those with hot soapy water too. And over here I have ingredients for the marinated mushrooms. I have some olive oil, white wine vinegar, pink Himalayan salt. I'm gonna add some crushed black peppercorns. I also have some minced garlic, red onion, and some dried rosemary from my garden. So that should be good, but we're gonna get started with washing the mushrooms first. You can see some of these are quite large, and then I have some smaller ones. So I'm going to wash these, but separate the large ones from the small ones, and I will use these little ones for the marinated mushrooms. I'm just taking a little bit off the end of the stem, just about that much. I have them separated, and so these are the bigger ones that I'm going to cut into pieces. These are the smaller ones. I'll probably cut some of those in half too. And then I also have the stems and a few of the mushrooms that I thought looked a little bit darker. So I will keep that for mushroom soup. So I have my mushrooms cut into the pieces that I want. I have some water that's almost at the boiling level, and I'm going to add the mushrooms, and we're going to cook the mushrooms for about 3 to 4 minutes, and this water is salted. And then we're going to strain them and pack our jars. This is called hot pack method. Put put that lid on, and when it comes to a boil, like I said, we will cook those mushrooms for about 3 to 4 minutes. I'm just going to give them a little bit of a rinse off because there's some foam on the top. This is what they look like. So we're going to fill our jars. I have my water in the canner. It's actually not quite to simmer, but it's hot. The jars are still warm, the mushrooms are hot, and then I'm going to fill the jars with water after I put the mushrooms in there. There's not a lot of mushrooms. I don't know how many jars I'm going to get, but we'll see. It's something better than nothing. Before you wash and dry your jars, make sure you check the rim of your jar to make sure there's no cracks or chips, because that will cause your jar to break in the canner. I'm going to fill the jar here to within a 1-inch headspace again. And I'm going to take my wooden utensil and I'm going to do this to get rid of all the air bubbles. And you can see as I do this, the air bubbles are rising to the top. We want to get rid of all of those air bubbles. And then you want to readjust your water to within an inch headspace from the top again. So your vegetables to within an inch, and then your liquid an inch headspace. You want to wipe the rim with a clean cloth, a clean wet cloth, and then put the lid on. Just slightly tighter than finger tight. Not a lot, but just slightly. So then we're going to put that in the canner. And like I said, that water is just not quite simmering, but it's hot as well. I'm going to continue on filling these jars. I have my 6 half-pint jars of mushrooms in the canner, and I'm going to put the lid on and get it up to pressure. So I have my lid. I've got that locked on. I've also checked before I did put the lid on. I also checked to make sure that vent hole is clear. That's very important. Always make sure the vent hole is completely clear on your pressure canner. So this is locked, and once there's a steady stream of steam coming through that vent hole, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes, and I'm going to time it for 10 minutes, and that way I know that this pot has vented for 10 minutes. Once that happens, I will put my regulator on there, and then that will allow the pressure to build in your pot. Once it gets up to 11 pounds of pressure, that is what I need for my particular pot. Again, check your owner's manual for your pressure canning pot. It could be different. Mine will be 11 pounds. Once gets to 11 pounds, I want it to stay at that level, and then I will set a timer for 45 minutes, and I'll process these mushrooms for 45 minutes. All right, you can see I've got the regulator on there now, and it is building up pressure. I need it to get to 11 pounds. Okay, well, I've got the mushrooms processing. I am going to just boil these mushrooms for the marinated mushrooms. So I'm going to do the same thing and boil those for about 3 to 4 minutes. While those mushrooms are boiling, I'm going to add a half cup of olive oil to a saucepan, and the same amount of white wine vinegar, half a cup. I also have about 5 cloves of garlic that I've minced, and that's about a half cup of red onion. Just cut that into slices. About a teaspoon of dried rosemary, half a tablespoon of brown sugar, quarter teaspoon of salt, and some black pepper. So I'm just going to simmer this on the stove and then pour it over the mushrooms. Okay, and I'm just going to rinse the mushrooms. Once they're drained, I'm just going to rinse them. And that was probably a pound of mushrooms that I used. Okay, the marinade was at a simmer, so I've got that. That's warm. I've got my mushrooms. They are blanched in the salted water. And there we go. And then I'm just going to pour this garlicky marinade over top. Oh my gosh, they smell so good. Just going to put some more pepper over top. So there, I'm just going to keep giving those a stir, and I will actually pack them into jars and keep them in the refrigerator for a couple of days. I'm sure they taste awesome already, but they'll probably be better in a couple of days. Okay, these mushrooms look awesome already. I'm gonna try them just because I'm impatient like that. They're really good. They will be, I just double dip with this fork. Oh well. They will be really good in a couple of days. Very, very good on salads. Or with cheese and meats and like cold meats, that'd be really nice. So I'm just gonna pack these mushrooms into jars. They're still warm right now, but I'll just leave them on the counter until they cool down, and then I can put them in the fridge. All right, the time is up for the mushrooms. I'm just gonna shut the stovetop off, and I am not gonna touch this until the pressure is down to 0, and then I actually leave it for another hour. I don't wanna take the lid off because there still could be steam in there, so we'll just leave that alone. So next I'm gonna make a soup out of those stems and those few bits of mushrooms that I had left. And I'm just gonna add some olive oil into my Dutch oven here and about a tablespoon of butter. I'm gonna add in about 3 small cloves of garlic and a half a chopped onion. This is the onion that I had from our garden, so it's a sweet onion. And I'll let those saute while I chop the mushrooms. So I'm just going to chop these mushrooms and add them to the sauteed onions and garlic. And I'm going to chop these stems up smaller. Just roughly chop them. So I just added the mushrooms to the garlic and onion mixture, and I'll saute those until they're nicely browned. The mushrooms are cooking down, and I'm going to add a little bit of salt, just some salt to taste. Some pepper. You can add in however much you like. I love pepper, so I'm going to dose it in there. And I also have some thyme that I dried from the garden, so I'll put some of that in there as well. Again, to taste however much you like, or you don't even need to put it in there. I'm going to add a carton of beef stock. I could have saved that mushroom water that I boiled the mushrooms in, but I wanted something with a little bit more flavor. So I used beef stock. And there's the mushrooms out of the pressure canner. You can see they're still bubbling away in there. So we got 6 jars for pizza or omelets or stir fry or anything that requires mushrooms. All right, I'm gonna add some cream I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. Add some cream to my mushroom soup. And I'm using heavy cream, 35%. So a little bit more. I'd say I've probably about a half a cup. And then I have just a little slurry of cornstarch, and I'm going to use that to thicken the soup because I forgot to add flour when I sauteed the mushrooms and garlic and onions, but that's okay. Cornstarch thickens it nicely too. I'm just going to pour the cornstarch in and thicken it. It was probably about 2 tablespoons of cornstarch And the same with water, probably 2 tablespoons of water to make a slurry. I'm just going to let this simmer just until the starch taste cooks out of the soup, and then it'll be ready to eat. Yeah, it looks really good. So all my mushrooms are prepared. So I've got 6 jars of mushrooms. And remember, when you take the jars out of your pressure canner, to always place them on a clean dish towel, because you don't want hot jars sitting on top of a cold counter, because it could cause your jars to crack. So leave your jars, don't touch them, don't fiddle with the lids or anything, just leave them on the counter for 24 hours. And then you can wipe the rim and take the lid ring off and store them in your pantry. And then also I've got my marinated mushrooms, which are already fabulous, so I can just imagine how good they're going to be when they've been in the refrigerator for a couple of days. And my mushroom soup. So I will be having mushroom soup for supper. So all of that I got for $5, 5 pounds of mushrooms for $5. And the cans of mushrooms, they're usually, depending on the variety, they're usually between $1.30 to $1.80 for a small can of mushrooms. So I saved right there already because I got 6 jars. Marinated mushrooms, I'm not sure, they're usually sold by the weight and they're usually quite expensive. So I got 2 jars of those, and I also made some soup from the stems, the leftover stems, and the few mushrooms that I didn't think were fit to can. So I got all of that for $5. Thanks for coming along today on another one of my budget stretching adventures, and for hanging out with me in the kitchen. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you again next time.